The Man Who Practiced For One Night, A Modern Great Gatsby. Chapter 1. In my younger and more forgettable years, my father gave me a piece of advice I've turned over ever since. Whenever you feel like judging someone, he told me, remember that not everyone has spent as much of their life rehearsing as you think. He did not say it exactly like that. But that is what it has come to mean to me, and it is the only useful thing I can say before I tell you about Gatsby, who spent more of his life rehearsing than any man I ever met, and who was, for that reason, both the most ridiculous person I have known and the only one I would defend. My name is Nick Carraway. I graduated from a middling high school in a middling town, the kind of place where the biggest building is the school itself, and the second biggest is the one where they process the checks that let people leave it. I did not distinguish myself there. I was the sort of student teachers described as pleasant, which is what you call a boy when there is genuinely nothing else to report. I left, did some unremarkable things in some unremarkable cities, and might have gone the rest of my life without thinking about that town again, except that 15 years after we graduated, an envelope arrived announcing the reunion, and with it, though I did not know it yet, the whole strange machinery of Gatsby began to turn. I did not know Gatsby in school. That is the first thing to understand. Nobody did really, though everybody would later claim they had. The name Gatsby did not exist when we were 17. There was a boy named James Gatz, and I could not have picked him out of a yearbook if you'd paid me, and this turned out to be the single most important fact about him, though it took me a long time and a great deal of watching to understand why. I moved back to the area that spring for reasons that don't matter, a job, a lease, the ordinary undramatic reasons people move anywhere, and I rented a small place at the edge of a good neighborhood, the kind of place where you can see the big houses without being expected to be in one. And the biggest house of all, an enormous rented thing that no one seemed to actually live in so much as maintain, belonged, I would learn, to a man who threw the most extravagant gatherings anyone in that town had ever seen, and who nobody, not one single guest, seemed able to describe when you asked them who he was. Gatsby? Oh, he's, you know. They never knew. Somebody said he made his money in, and here the sentence always changed, tech or real estate or something overseas, or something they'd rather not ask about. Every party produced a new rumor and retired an old one, and the man at the center of all of it was as blank and bright as a screen with nothing playing on it yet. I met him at one of his own parties, which is a stranger sentence than it sounds. I had been invited, actually invited, by a small cream-colored card, which I later learned made me almost unique, since most people simply heard there was a party and came, and I spent the first hour the way you do, holding a drink I didn't want, until a man about my age with a careful smile appeared at my elbow and told me the band was very good this year, wasn't it, and called me old sport, which I had never heard a real person say, and asked if I was enjoying myself. And only after several minutes of this did I realize, with the small vertigo of the thing, that I was talking to Gatsby himself, and that he had been introducing himself to me as a guest at his own party, as though he too were just someone who had wandered in and hoped to be liked. That was the first time I saw him do it, become someone in real time, right in front of me, and I did not understand yet that this was the only thing he knew how to do, and that he had been practicing it alone for 15 years, for one specific night that had not yet come. Chapter 2. The reason for all of it, the house, the parties, the careful smile, the 15 years, was a woman named Daisy, and I have to tell you about her the way Gatsby saw her, because the way anyone else saw her won't explain a thing. To the rest of us, Daisy was a girl we'd gone to school with. Pretty, yes, in the effortless way that made her popular without her seeming to try, and married now, and living 2 towns over, and by every ordinary measure exactly as remarkable and exactly as unremarkable as the rest of us had turned out to be. She had a husband named Tom, who had been a star on the school's teams and had spent every year since then getting quietly worse at being the person that had made him, and who now had money that was older and duller than Gatsby's, and wore it like a man wears a coat he stopped noticing. Daisy had a life. It was a fine life. There was nothing in it, as far as I could ever tell, that was waiting to be rescued. But to Gatsby, Daisy was not a woman. Daisy was the last moment he had ever been happy without having to pretend. I got the story in pieces, over that spring and summer, and I've assembled it the way you assemble anything about Gatsby, half from what he told me and half from correcting what he told me. When they were 17, James Gatz, poor, awkward, wearing clothes his mother had bought a size too big so he could grow into them, which he was always in the middle of doing and never finished, had for a few weeks been close to Daisy. How close is the part that changed every time he told it? In one version, they had been something like a couple. In another, he had simply carried her books and made her laugh twice. I have come to believe the truth was nearer the second, and that this is precisely why it could grow over 15 years into the first. A large love needs a small true thing to grow on, the way a great vine needs only a crack in the wall. Then she had, in the ordinary cruelty of being 17, drifted toward the boys who mattered, toward Tom, and James Gatz had understood, in one clean, humiliating stroke, the entire architecture of the world he lived in. That he had been dismissed not for anything he had done but for what he was, which was poor and shapeless, and wearing clothes a size too big, and that no amount of being pleasant or being funny or carrying anyone's books would ever change what he was, because the world did not judge what you did. It judged what you appeared to be. And appearance, unlike almost everything else, could be bought. That, I think, was the true birth of Gatsby, not the money. The money came later and was only the tool. What was born in a 17-year-old boy watching a girl walk toward someone else was a single conviction that would run his whole life, that if he could return one day transformed, richer, taller in every way that counted, unrecognizable as the boy who had been dismissed, and stand in front of her fully remade, then the dismissal would be undone. Not forgiven, undone. As though it had never happened. He did not want revenge on the world that had ranked him. He wanted to go back and be ranked again, correctly this time, and have her see it. And the world, obligingly, gave him exactly one venue where such a thing could theoretically occur. One night, every so often, when the entire cast of that original humiliation would be gathered in one room, dressed up, taking stock of one another, measuring who had risen and who had sunk. The reunion. He showed me the card once. Not the party invitations he sent out by the 100, the other one, the one that had been sent to him, the 15-year reunion notice, cream-colored, ordinary, the same one that had come to my own mailbox and that I had stuck to the refrigerator and forgot. His was in a frame. He kept it on the desk in a study he otherwise never used, angled toward the chair, the way another man might keep a photograph of someone he'd lost. He had, I realized, built an entire mansion, thrown a summer of parties costing more than my house, rented cars and bought suits, and invented a past and practiced a voice, all of it aimed at a single Saturday evening in a rented banquet hall with a cash bar, and a laminated sign that said "Welcome back, class" in letters someone had printed at an office store. "Doesn't look like much, does it?" he said, watching me look at it. And then, before I could answer in that hopeful, careful voice, arranging it half a degree closer to true north. "But you should see what I'm going to do with it, old sport. You should see how it's going to go." I said it sounded like it would be quite a night. "It's going to be," said Gatsby, "the night everything goes back to how it should have been." And he smiled the careful smile, and I understood that he had said this sentence, or one like it, 10,000 times, alone in the enormous house, to no one for 15 years, and that he believed it now more completely than he had ever believed anything, which is what happens to a sentence you say that many times, whether or not it was ever true. Chapter 3. There came a night, well into that summer, when Gatsby told me the truth about himself, which is to say he told me a great many things that were not true, and in the gaps between them I found the truth, which was worse than any of the lies and better than all of them. We were sitting on the back terrace of the enormous rented house after a party had emptied out. The caterers were folding tables. There is no lonelier sight in the world than a place built for a crowd after the crowd has gone, and Gatsby sat in the middle of it looking out at the dark, and he began, unprompted, to tell me who he was. He was, he said, the son of wealthy people, all dead now. He had been educated somewhere old and expensive. The name changed as he said it, as though even now he was choosing. He had lived in the capitals of Europe, collecting things, hunting, painting a little, trying, he said, to forget something very sad that had happened to him. He said all of this in the careful voice, watching my face, and when he saw that my face was doing the polite thing faces do when they don't believe you, he reached into his pocket and produced, of all things, evidence. A photograph of himself looking cold in front of a building that could have been anywhere. A medal in a small box. He laid them on the table between us like a man playing cards he had practiced playing, and I understood that he had assembled these props not to fool me, particularly, but to fool the one person he needed, on the one night, and that he was rehearsing on me because I was there. "You don't have to do this," I said. He stopped. It was the first time I ever saw the careful smile falter, and behind it, for just a moment, was the boy in the clothes a size too big, and he looked at me with something close to panic, because I had done the one thing his whole architecture was built to prevent. I had seen him. "Do what?" he said. "The photograph, the medal, the dead wealthy parents. You don't have to do it, not with me." And then Gatsby, J. Gatsby, master of the careful smile, put his head in his hands at a folding table on a terrace built for 400 people, and told me the actual thing, and the actual thing was this, that he was afraid that if he ever stopped, even for an hour, even with someone who didn't matter, the real one would come back. James Gatz, the boy who had been dismissed. He had spent 15 years so far from that boy that he no longer knew the way back. And this was the goal. This was the entire point. And yet he was terrified of it too, because a man who has traveled that far from himself is always, at every moment, exactly one honest conversation away from the whole distance collapsing at once. "If I stop being him," he said, meaning Gatsby, meaning the invention, "I don't go back to nothing. That's what nobody understands. I go back to him, to Gatz, to the kid nobody looked at twice, and I can't. I've been not him for so long that being him again would kill me. Do you see? I didn't build all this," he gestured at the dark house, the folded tables, the whole ruinous summer, to impress her. "I built it so I could never go back to being the person she didn't want. She's not the prize, old sport. He struggled for it. He was not a man with words, only with a voice. She's the proof. If she sees the new one and chooses him, then the new one is real. Then he was always real. Then Gatz never happened." I have thought about that conversation more than any other in my life, because he was not in that moment a foolish man. He was the most clear-sighted man I have ever heard speak, describing with perfect accuracy the trap he was in, and then, having described it perfectly, choosing to walk deeper into it, because the only alternative he could see was to become again the boy in the oversized clothes, and no clear sight in the world was worth that to him. He knew. That was the terrible part. Gatsby always knew. He was not deceived about anything except the one thing that no amount of knowing can fix, which is the belief that some future night can reach backward and unmake a past afternoon. That belief is not a mistake of the intelligence. It is a wound, and he had been keeping it open on purpose for 15 years, because a wound that closes leaves a scar, and a scar is a thing you have accepted. And Gatsby had accepted nothing and would accept nothing, and this refusal was at once the most contemptible and the most magnificent thing about him. He gathered up the photograph and the medal and put them back in his pocket, and the careful smile came back over his face like water closing over a stone, and he asked me if I thought the band had been better this week than last. And I said yes, I thought they had. Because there are moments when the only decent thing you can do for a man is to let him go back to pretending, and I have never regretted giving him that one. It was the last easy gift I had to give him, and it cost me nothing, and it was worth, I think now, more than the medal and the photograph combined, because it was the only true thing that passed between us that night, disguised as the only true things ever were with Gatsby, as a small lie about a band. Chapter 4. The trouble began, as trouble around Gatsby always did, with the gap between the night he was rehearsing for and the night that actually existed. Because here is what Gatsby, in 15 years of preparation, had never quite let himself learn, that the reunion he was preparing for had also been happening to everyone else, only in reverse. He had spent those years becoming someone. Everyone else had spent them becoming no one in particular, which is what most of us do and are right to do and are happier for. And a man who arrives at a reunion having transformed himself completely into a room full of people who have gently and contentedly not, does not read as a triumph. He reads as an accusation. He reads as a man who tried too hard at a thing nobody else had known was a contest. I tried to tell him this. I did it clumsily the week before, over drinks he'd insisted on paying for in a way that was itself part of the rehearsal. "Nobody's keeping score anymore," I said. "That's the thing you should know going in. Whatever the score was 15 years ago, everybody put down their pencils. They forgot the game was even on." "I didn't forget," he said. "I know. That's what I'm worried about. You're going to walk in there ready to win a game that ended, and everyone else is going to be standing around a cash bar asking about each other's kids." He looked at me with genuine bafflement, and it was the bafflement more than anything that broke my heart a little, because I saw that he truly could not conceive of it. In his world, the game had never stopped. It could not have stopped. If it had stopped, then his whole life had been the elaborate winning of a contest no one was holding, and that was a thought so large and so annihilating that his mind simply declined to have it, the way an eye declines to look at the sun. "She'll see me," he said, as though that answered everything. And in his ledger it did. There was only ever the one-line item. Everything else in the world, the house, the cars, the parties, the guests, the rumors, me, was overhead. Daisy seeing him was the only revenue the entire enterprise had ever been designed to earn. Tom, her husband, came into it around then, and Tom is worth a word because he was the one person at the whole affair who instinctively understood what Gatsby was, and hated him for it, precisely because Tom had been the boy who won the original game and had spent 15 years slowly losing the winnings. A man like Tom can always smell a man like Gatsby. He can smell the effort. The effort is the tell. Tom had never in his life had to try, and had therefore never had to become anything, and had therefore quietly become nothing. And here was Gatsby, who had tried at everything, and the two of them recognized each other across the banquet hall, the way two men recognize each other as the answer to the question the other one has failed to ask. But I'm ahead of myself. The reunion had not happened yet. That week, the week before, was the last week the whole thing still lived where Gatsby had always kept it, in the future, perfect and unspent. A night that could still go exactly the way he had rehearsed it 10,000 times, because it had not yet been permitted to go the only way real nights ever go, which is some way you did not rehearse. I remember he called me the night before, late. He didn't have anything to say particularly. He asked if I thought he should wear the blue or the gray. I said the gray. There was a long pause, the kind of pause that has a whole life in it, and then he said, 15 years, old sport, just that. And I said I knew. And he said, "She's going to see me," one more time, quiet, not to me, and hung up. And I stood in my small rented kitchen holding the phone, and I had the sudden certain feeling, standing there, that I should drive over and stop the whole thing somehow, and I didn't, because there was nothing to stop. That was the trouble with Gatsby. There was never anything you could point to and stop. There was only a man walking toward a door he had built himself, carrying 15 years, and no way to tell him that the room on the other side was just a room. Chapter 5. The reunion was held in the banquet room of a hotel off the interstate, the kind of hotel that exists mainly for weddings and the occasional sales conference, with carpet chosen to hide things and lighting chosen to flatter no one in particular. There was a cash bar. There was a laminated sign. There was a table by the door with name tags printed in a large friendly font, each one bearing the small, cruel miracle of your own 17-year-old yearbook photo beside your current name, so that everyone spent the first 10 minutes doing arithmetic on each other's faces. I got there early because I was worried, and so I saw them arrive, the whole cast, and I want to tell you about them, because they were the ones who got caught in the machine Gatsby had built, and none of them had signed up for it. And that is the part of the story I think about now more than Gatsby himself. There was a man named Klipspringer who had been the class clown and was now something in insurance, and who had come, I think, genuinely hoping to be the class clown again for one night, and who found instead that the jokes that had made a room of teenagers howl made a room of tired adults smile politely and check their phones, and who spent the evening getting quietly, sadly drunk at the cash bar, laughing a little too hard at everything, a man performing a self that had also, like Gatsby's, expired. Only he hadn't known it was going to. There was Jordan, who had been Daisy's friend and still was, and who saw the whole thing coming before I did. She found me by the bar and nodded across the room and said, "He's here, isn't he? The one who rented the house. Somebody said he came for Daisy." She didn't say it cruelly. She said it the way you'd note a storm on the horizon with a kind of weary competence. "She doesn't know," Jordan said. "She barely remembers him, you know that, right? Whatever this is, she's not holding the other end of it." I said I knew. "Does he know?" I said I wasn't sure it would matter to him if he did. Jordan looked at me a moment, and something in her face softened into something almost like fear. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," she said, and when I find Daisy, to stand near her, the way you stand near someone when you can feel that something is about to be asked of them that they didn't agree to. And then Daisy came in, and I watched the whole room fail to be a big deal about it, because that is what 15 years does. It takes the girl the whole class once oriented around and returns her as simply one more person at a party, warm and a little tired, with photos on her phone of children and a husband getting a drink he didn't need. And no one in that room felt the floor tilt toward her the way it once had, no one except one man, who had been standing by the far wall for an hour in a gray suit he'd asked me about the night before, holding a drink he wasn't drinking, waiting. He didn't go to her. That was the thing that undid me. After 15 years, when the moment finally arrived, Gatsby didn't cross the room. He stood there and he let her not notice him, over and over, for the better part of an hour, because I understood this slowly, watching him. The not being noticed yet was the last moment the night could still be perfect. As long as he had not yet walked up to her, the reunion he had rehearsed was still possible. The second he spoke to her, it would become the reunion that was actually happening, and some animal part of him knew the difference, and clung, for one more hour, to the version that lived in the future. He asked me to do it. Of course he did. He came over, careful smile trembling at the edges, and he asked me, his voice very low, if I would go and mention to Daisy that there was someone here who would love to say hello, someone she went to school with, someone who'd done well. He couldn't do it himself. 15 years of preparation, and at the door of the actual room he needed a middleman, because a middleman keeps the thing at arm's length one moment longer, and Gatsby, I saw then, did not actually want the moment. He wanted the approaching of the moment. He had built his entire life out of approach, and approach was the only country he knew how to live in, and the arrival was a foreign place where his language was not spoken. So I did it. God help me. I went and I told Daisy there was an old classmate who'd love to say hello, and she said of course, warm and easy, the way she said everything, and she came, and Gatsby turned. And for one instant, one single instant that I would not trade, that made the whole ruinous summer almost worth it, the careful smile fell away entirely, and what stood there in the gray suit was James Gatz, 17, hopeful, undefended. Looking at the one person in the world he had rebuilt himself atom by atom to be seen by. And it was the truest and most naked I ever saw a human face. And it lasted exactly as long as it took Daisy Buchanan to smile pleasantly and say, "I'm sorry, you'll have to remind me. It's been so long. We had a class together." Chapter 6. I have gone over what happened next many times, trying to be fair to everyone, because the easy version of this story blames Daisy, and the easy version is a lie. Daisy did nothing wrong. That is the thing I need you to understand before I tell you how it ended. She was kind to him. She was, in fact, exactly as kind to Gatsby as she was to everyone, which was the whole tragedy, because Gatsby had spent 15 years earning something that could not be earned, a specialness in her memory that had simply never existed. And when he finally presented the invoice, she paid it in the only currency she had, which was ordinary friendliness, and ordinary friendliness, to a man expecting the redemption of his entire life, is worse than cruelty. Cruelty at least confirms you mattered enough to wound. What Daisy gave him was gentle, warm, and total forgetting, and against that there is no defense and no appeal. He tried. God, he tried. In front of her he became, in real time, everything he had built. He mentioned, lightly, the things, the house, the travels, the successes, dropping them one at a time like a man laying out treasures on a cloth, watching her face for the moment the treasures would rearrange her memory of him, would make the 17-year-old boy she didn't remember into someone she should have. And Daisy admired them. That was the horror of it. She admired them the way you admire a stranger's nice car in a parking lot, sincerely, warmly, and with absolutely no revision of who you understand yourself to be. "That's wonderful," she kept saying. "Good for you. Good for you." The three most devastating words in the English language, when what you needed to hear was it was always you. Tom drifted over because Tom could smell it, and Tom did the thing that men like Tom do, which was to establish, through a few easy questions, the exact texture of Gatsby's success, probing for the effort underneath it, and finding it because it was everywhere, because Gatsby's success was made of nothing but effort. An effort to a man like Tom who had never expended any, smells like fraud even when every dollar is real. "Rented the big place on the ridge, didn't you?" Tom said, landing on the word rented the way you'd land a small, precise dart. And Gatsby, who had an answer for everything, who had rehearsed 10,000 nights, had no answer for that, because it was true, and because it revealed the one thing all the rehearsal had been designed to hide. That the whole magnificent edifice was borrowed, was staged, was a set built for an audience of one who had just looked at it and said "good for you," and asked if he remembered which class they'd shared. I got him out of there. I don't remember exactly how. I remember my hand on his arm and the cash bar and the laminated sign and Klipspringer laughing too loud at something behind us, and I remember steering Gatsby through the door into the parking lot, into the ordinary night air, and I remember that he came without resistance, docile as a sleepwalker, because the thing that had been animating him for 15 years had, somewhere back in that room between Good for You and Rented, quietly gone out. We stood in the parking lot by his rented car. The interstate hummed somewhere close. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, in a voice with all the careful gone out of it, a flat, plain voice I'd never heard him use, the voice, I realized, of James Gatz. "She really didn't remember." "No," I said, because he had earned the truth finally at the worst possible moment, the way people always do. 15 years, he said, not to me, to the parking lot, to the hum of the interstate. I built the whole thing out of a few weeks that he stopped. And I watched him do the arithmetic he had refused to do for 15 years, watched him finally let himself calculate the real size of the true thing at the bottom of it all, the small crack in the wall the enormous vine had grown on, and find that it was even smaller than he'd feared, that it was, perhaps, nothing at all, that he had carried a few classes and a laugh or two into a cathedral of a life and knelt before it every day, and that the God had never been there. "Come on," I said, I'll drive you home." "It's a rented house," he said and laughed, one short terrible laugh, the first fully honest sound I ever heard him make. "It was always a rented house, old sport." Chapter 7. Gatsby died at the end of that summer, though not in the way the word usually means, and I have never known how to say it plainly, so I will just say what happened. The lease on the big house ran out in September. He didn't renew it. There were no more parties. The last one, it turned out, had been the one where I sat with him on the terrace among the folded tables, though neither of us knew it was the last. The rented cars went back. The caterers were paid and dismissed. One by one, the props of Gatsby were struck, the way a set is struck after a show closes, and what I did not expect, what I don't think Gatsby expected either, was how little was underneath. Not nothing. That would have been cleaner. What was underneath was a quiet, tired man named James Gatz, who had spent so long being someone else that being himself was a language he'd half forgotten, and who moved through those last weeks like a man, translating his own life word by word from a tongue he no longer spoke fluently. I saw him a few times. He'd taken a small apartment, an ordinary place, the kind of place he'd built an entire mansion to escape, and the strange thing, the thing I keep returning to, was that he seemed almost at peace in it, in the way of a man who has set down a weight so heavy he'd forgotten it was optional. He made coffee. He asked about my job. He did not say old sport. That phrase, it turned out, had belonged entirely to Gatsby, and Gatsby was gone, and Gatz had no use for it. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said to me once in the small kitchen, an ordinary mug in his ordinary hand. "Not her. Everybody thinks it's about her. It was never really about her." He looked out the window, which faced a parking lot, not a bay, not a green light, just cars. "I keep thinking about the 15 years, all of it. Every night I practiced. Every dollar. I keep thinking, what if I'd spent even one of those years just being the person I was? Would somebody have wanted him? I'll never know. That's the part I can't get past. I made sure I'll never know. I killed him off so completely to win one night that I never gave him a single chance to just live. And he might have been fine, old sport." The phrase slipped out once at the end like a ghost passing through a room it used to haunt. He might have been enough. That is the closest thing to wisdom Gatsby ever spoke, and he spoke it as Gatz, in a rented kitchen, to an audience of one, which was the only size of audience the true things in his life were ever permitted. Here is what I want to say about him, now that it's over. The world will tell you Gatsby was a fool, that he chased a woman who didn't remember him, built a fortune to impress a room that had stopped keeping score, spent 15 years rehearsing for a single night that lasted 40 minutes and ended with the words "good for you." And all of that is true, and if that were all of it, he would deserve the small laugh people give him when I tell the story, the same laugh they gave Klipspringer's jokes, the polite dismissal of a man who tried too hard. But I stood in that parking lot. I saw the face fall away and the boy underneath, and I will tell you that the thing driving Gatsby was not vanity, and it was not even love. It was a refusal, a total, magnificent, ruinous refusal, to accept that the world's first judgment of him was the correct one. The world had looked at a poor boy in oversized clothes and ranked him low and moved on, the way the world ranks everyone and moves on, carelessly, permanently, and almost always right. And Gatsby, alone among all the people I have ever known, had looked at that judgment and said, "No, not the world is unfair, everyone says that." He said no, and then he spent his entire life, every dollar and every night, trying to reach back and overturn a verdict that had already been filed and forgotten by everyone but him. He was wrong. You cannot overturn it. The afternoon you were dismissed does not care how much you spend on the evening you return. The past is not a rented house. You cannot take a lease on it and redecorate. Daisy will smile and say good for you and mean it kindly every single time forever, because she is a real person living in the actual present and not a judge sitting in the courthouse of your 17th year, where you are the only one who ever comes to plead. And yet, when I think of everyone else at that reunion, the whole warm, tired, contented room of people who had long ago put down their pencils and accepted the world's ranking of them, who had made their peace, who were, by every reasonable measure, wiser and happier than Gatsby ever was, I find that I cannot quite bring myself to prefer them. They had accepted the verdict. He never did. It destroyed him, and it was the wrong thing to do, and I would tell anyone I loved to do the opposite, and still, standing in that parking lot beside the ruin of him, watching the last of Gatsby drain out into the hum of the interstate, I thought, here was a man who would not agree to be small. Everyone else in that room had agreed. Only Gatsby, poor, magnificent, ridiculous Gatsby, had held out against all the evidence, against 15 wasted years, against the plain arithmetic of a girl who didn't remember his name, held out for the single unreasonable proposition that what he was born as did not have to be what he stayed. They found the apartment empty the next spring. He'd moved on somewhere, no forwarding address, the way Gatz had always known how to disappear. I never heard from him again. I don't know if he ever tried being just himself, the person he wondered about in the kitchen, or whether that man got a chance to find out if he'd have been enough. I like to think he did. I have no evidence for it. Believing things I have no evidence for is, I've noticed, the one habit Gatsby left me, and I've decided to keep it in his memory as the only inheritance he had to leave. And I've come to think, not the worst one a man could pass on. So we go on, all of us, carrying our old verdicts, most of us having quietly agreed to them. And every so often I meet someone who hasn't agreed, who is spending too much and trying too hard and reaching back for something that cannot be reached, and everyone around them is laughing the polite laugh, and I don't laugh. I remember my father's advice about how much of their life people have spent rehearsing, and I think of a man in a gray suit crossing an entire life to reach a banquet hall off the interstate, and I keep my mouth shut, and I let them go on reaching. Because the reaching is the whole of it. It always was. The green light was never Daisy, and it was never the house, and it was never even the night. It was the reaching itself, the refusal, against a current that has beaten every single person who ever lived, to be carried quietly out to the ordinary sea of who you were told you were. The end.